And welcome to Module 1 of Postmodern Esotericism. This is a course that's being offered this fall at the Inner Alchemy Mystery School. And we decided that for this first module, we would share it with the general public because I think it's something that will enable us to start a dialogue with those who are sincerely interested in taking a deeper look at their esoteric practice and the esoteric practices of those around them. So let's go ahead and jump in. And so what I'd like to talk about first is kind of give everyone an overview. We had this conversation in our last semester about how trauma informs our spiritual practice and how trauma informs our magical, our overview or our worldview of the world around us. And so in this course, we wanted to look at taking the ancient traditions of our ancestors, the ancient traditions of cultures around the world, and bring them to the postmodern world in a way that allows us to move beyond the myths. And we're going to talk about why that matters and share a little bit about our vision for the future while we invite those who might be watching to become part of this conversation. So first, dispelling the myths. It's important, and many of you have heard me say this time and time again, that no one identified as pagan until the mid-20th century. Pagan was a term that was thrown around by the Roman Catholic and later the Anglican Church in disparagement of those whose spiritual traditions, in the plural, didn't meet the expectations or conform to the dogma and doctrine of Roman Catholicism or Anglicanism. It's a term that was used to other people, not a term that would have ever been accepted by or embraced by those who practiced esoteric traditions no matter what. But it's really important that we understand that this modern day notion that paganism is something that existed in the ancient world is false. It's a misunderstanding, it's a lie. It's been used for people to profiteer, and it's been used by people who simply didn't have the background to understand what they were talking about. So no one would have identified as pagan, and there was no ancient religion. They were ancient religions, and none of them were religions of witches. So people often tell me when they hear me say that, well, the Tuscan Busqueto in outside of Lake Nemi that what's his name, Charles Leland saw. He talks about it in the Gospel of Aradia, and the simple fact is the Gospel of Aradia is very questionable in terms of its veracity, sources, and contentions. The Tuscan Busqueti or groves were gatherings and groups of religious adherents that had nothing to do with witches. They were religious gatherings devoted to Diana and Dianos. In other regions, there might have been religious gatherings dedicated to Tana and Tanus, or Jana and Janus. So we need to understand these were not gatherings of witches, as much as pop culture would love to pretend, and films have used that as the basis for their storylines. It's important to understand the difference between myths, legends, stories, and reality. So we're talking anthropology here. We're talking true and verifiable history, as anyone who grew up in the esoteric tradition from Italy, from Sicily, would be able to verify. The religious cults of antiquity were intersectional with magical practice, to be sure. There were certainly some people who were adherents or devotees of Diana and Dianus who would have practiced esotericism, because most people practiced esotericism. But there were those who might have been the specialist, the person who takes away maloikyo, the person who does herbal healing, who also might have had a devotion to Hecate or to Diana or to another part of the Roman, Etruscan, or Greek religious cults, but not directly related to the practice of magic and esotericism. So their magic and esotericism, it might have informed their religious traditions, and their religious traditions might have informed their esotericism, but those gatherings were not gatherings of witches, period. And there is no support other than in fiction that was written in the medieval era to support the idea that these gatherings were anything but religious cults. And particularly, I get aggravated when I see these particularly young folks who, you know, they read the books written by Raven Grimassi and Charles Leland. They've read lots of Wiccan inspired literature, and they've seen movies like you know, like Coven and The Craft and things like that, who don't understand that the magic of Italy and Sicily is plainly documented, and those who live in those countries can tell you, who were practitioners, and that's an important part, because not everybody was a practitioner. So just because your father or your grandfather or your aunt or uncle come from the old country, if they weren't esoteric practitioners, they have no idea what the hell they're talking about. The magic of Italy and Sicily was animistic. It was folk magic. It was herbal medicine and esotericism, and it thrived in the ancient Etruscan, Roman, and Greek and Afro-Sicilian worlds. But it was not this religious devotion to deities. That was a completely separate thing, and to pretend otherwise is cultural appropriation and ignorance. Some of those practitioners may have also embraced, as I said, the dozens of ancient religions there. There's no way of telling besides looking at the documents that were left behind by your ancestors. But if one of your ancestors, for example, as did mine, embraced the Diana and Dianus, cults, then they would have practiced that religious gathering themselves, but it doesn't mean that everyone in Italy or everyone in Sicilia would have practiced those things. There was no religion of witches, until the 1950s, when Gardner first put forth the nonsense, followed by other esotericists like Murray and things like that. And there is no documented evidence to support those absurd claims. So I think it really helps us to understand the origins of folk magic. Folk magic appears throughout the world in many different cultures in response to oppression or trauma. So oppression by the church, resistance to colonization, direct response to traumatic events and oppression and violence, and a blending of cultural influences, as we see with the mestizo culture in Central America. Now, why does that matter? It matters because it's our story. No one gets to whitewash it. No one gets to repackage it and retell it for their personal profit. There are unscrupulous social media influencers who are profiting from it, saying that they're practicing Italian American folk magic when they're not. Saying when what they're really practicing is paganism. There are some folks out there who genuinely practice Italian American folk magic and Italian folk magic or Sicilian folk magic, and that would be people like Mary Grace Farren. That would be people like Dee Norman and people who actually understand the traditions, like Dr. Sabina Magliocco, whose last name I probably just screwed up because I'm not really sure. Anyway, there are scholars out there who can tell you, there are practitioners out there who can tell you the difference between neo-paganism and our actual traditions. And so to pretend, as we see with, with some of the folks that are on social media, that their neo-paganism with a little bit of Italian herbs and seasoning, which we particularly see with people like Raven Grimassi and Lori Bruno and others like them, is cultural appropriation. Even if you're Italian, even if you're Afro-Sicilian, if you're promoting something that isn't true for the sake of personal benefit, that's cultural appropriation, because that's not the way that our tradition, as Italian, as Southern Italians or Afro-Sicilians, actually manifest itself in the ancient world. And pretending that you were initiated by some mysterious cult on top of Mount Etna or here or there, all of those bullshit stories do nothing but appropriate from our culture, and they're shameful. So I have a vision for the future, and I think it's one that a lot of people are beginning to embrace. And that is a need for us to foster safe spaces for people to reconnect with their ancestral culture and heritage, to actually have exposure to various spiritual traditions and religious traditions, and to reimagine esotericism through the lens of modern science and metaphysics. I have this idea that we can both lift up and protect our neo-pagan sisters, brothers, and others while still safeguarding our traditions from cultural appropriation. And I'd like to personally focus on integrating clinically proven trauma-informed approaches to mental wellness and healing with our esoteric practice so that we can release primitive superstitions and baggage. You know, the ideas and the notions and the constructs of people in the ancient world should inform us, might educate us on what they believe, but does not make sense for us in a postmodern world to embrace those kind of notions, to imagine that everything happens because some imaginary god, whether it's the Roman or Greek gods or the Etruscan gods or the Abrahamic gods. The locus of power for you and for me is within ourselves. And when we learn how to use that power, when we learn how to shift the energy around us, within us, and extend that shift in energy to the cosmos, that's when we're able to actually affect change. Whether we do it metaphysically or physically, whether we do it through science or through metaphysics, doesn't really matter because we're still doing the same thing. So here at the Inner Alchemy Mystery School, we maintain a safe and respected space for those who wish to observe blended 20th century pagan approaches, secular humanist approaches, and folk magic approaches without permitting cultural appropriation of any of our traditions. And so we're happy to be able to bring that to the general public. Now, my personal hope is to be able to embrace and study the ancient and modern practices of esotericism and metaphysics without the primitive constructs and superstition that tend to get in the way. So if you're somebody who embraces science, who really wants to understand why some metaphysical phenomena seem to manifest in our world, there should be a safe place where you can learn and develop and be supported in that practice. And there are many people, both in the pagan community and the non-pagan community, who stand by ready to do that with ethics, with a strong moral compass. But there are also those who are parasites, who are just monetizing their social media channels and saying whatever it is that they think will get them the most views and misrepresenting what they're doing as Italian folk magic, Sicilian folk magic, Italian American folk magic, Mexican folk magic, you name it. So within this course that you're watching the first module of, we're going to explore postmodern metaphysical concepts, including Hermeticism, not the Kabbalah version, but an authentic version. We're going to, I apologize for that, the phone never rings until I'm doing a class. So including Hermeticism, but not necessarily the Kabbalah version, herbology, entheogenic spiritual practices, and transcultural shamanism through the Jungian lens of healing post-traumatic stress responses. And so I'm really excited about sharing that with everybody. I hope that some of you will consider checking us out. You could do that for free for 3 days. Take a look at some of the many courses we have on the African traditional religions, on tarot, scopa, on divination of other forms of divination, herbology, entheogenics, the Italian and Afro-Sicilian traditions of that get called spegonaria in the present day, but were not so labeled in the ancient world, and so much more. Catholic folk magic, Catholic conjure, so many different things. We invite you to come on over. On the next screen, you're going to see the information on how to visit us, check us out for 3 days. I will look forward to seeing you in class.